Hello, it's Thursday the 9th of September and welcome to Korea 24. I'm your host, Kwon Jang-woo. North Korea staged a nighttime military parade on Thursday to mark the 73rd anniversary of the regime's founding, but there was no speech from Kim Jong-un and no new strategic weapons unveiled. We'll have more details in news briefing shortly. On Korean Politics Digest, we'll take a look at the latest developments from the two main political camps in their race to pick their presidential candidates for next year's elections. And then on Explore Korea, our returning arts and culture contributor introduces us to two exhibitions being held in the Seocheon district. We'll have all that and more on today's Korea 24. After weeks of preparations, North Korea held a massive military parade to mark the 73rd anniversary of the national founding, but no new weaponry was featured. To give us details of the procession, as well as our other headlines of the day, we have in the studio with us KBS World Radio News Editor Koo Hee-jin. Hello, Hee-jin.
Hello, Jang.
So let's look further at this parade. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was on hand to observe the procession at Kim Il-sung Square in central Pyongyang to mark its September 9th anniversary. However, we did not see any new revelations of North Korea's latest arms development. So what did we see, Hee-jin?
Well, so far, North Korea has released more than 70 photographs of the parade, which began at the stroke of midnight. This year, there were less than 5 that featured military weapons and delivery systems. Most featured the thousands of military personnel marching in tight formations, as well as the throng of Pyongyang residents who cheered enthusiastically at the sight of their leader and the procession. And as you mentioned, there was no big reveal of North Korea's latest weaponry, nor did Kim Jong-un make a speech. And instead, we saw Lee Il-hwan, the ruling Workers' Party propaganda director, deliver an address in which he said the parade is North Korea's most noble homage to the state. What is of note is the pictures highlighted its quarantine and countermeasures troops dressed head to toe in bright red-orange hazmat suits, complete with biohazard masks that represented the regime's fight against COVID-19.
Right, I'm sure we'll see more details from satellite pictures from North Korea watchdogs in the days to come. Meanwhile, the leaders of North Korea's traditional allies, China and Russia, sent congratulatory messages to mark the occasion. South Korea, on the other hand, kept up its efforts to stress dialogue in re-engaging North Korea in denuclearization efforts in an annual regional multilateral defense forum. Can you tell us more?
Yes, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin sent messages to Kim Jong-un stressing cooperation between these allies. According to the North's official Korean Central News Agency, Xi said in his message that he highly values the relations of the two nations and intends to enhance their ties to provide greater welfare for their people. The KCNA also reported that Putin said North Korea and Russian relations are based on great tradition of mutual respect. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Seo Uk-on in South Korea stressed the importance of establishing lasting peace on the Korean peninsula, climate change and space security in his opening remarks at the 2021 Seoul Defense Dialogue, which runs through Friday. The forum will virtually connect high-level defense officials from participating nations, including the US, Britain, Japan, China and Russia. We will likely see similar efforts next week in foreign ministerial talks between South Korea's Chung Eui-yong and China's Wang Yi in Seoul, as well as discussions between top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the US and Japan, slated to be held in Tokyo.
Let's turn now to the latest on COVID-19. The number of new daily infections remained above 2,000 for a second day, which prompted health officials to urge the public to once again adhere to social distancing protocols, especially in the Greater Seoul area. Can you break down the figures for us?
Yes, the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency on Thursday added 2,049 new cases, raising the nation's cumulative caseload to 267,470. The Seoul metropolitan area reported 1,407 domestic cases, exceeding 1,400 for a second day, accounting for an alarming 69.7% of local infections. Son Young-nae, a senior health ministry official, said that infection trends over the past week show the majority of cases centered in the Greater Seoul area, with 4.6 cases reported per 100,000 people. This is double the rate for non-capital regions. Still, Son forecast that the fourth wave will likely peak in mid-September and start to subside, given the current pace of vaccinations. He added that this month will be critical in containing the latest uptick of the pandemic, once again urging nationwide support and participation in antivirus measures, especially ahead of the long Chuseok holiday weekend that begins on September 18th.
Turning to the National Assembly now, the floor leader of the main opposition People Power Party, Kim Ki-hyun, on Thursday stressed the need to put an end to the Moon Jae-in government.
Yes, he's speaking at an address to Parliament. Kim said that electing the ruling Democratic Party's presidential candidate, whoever that may be, would simply mean another season of the incumbent government. Kim said that ushering in Season 2 would mean that the nation would be permanently trapped in an abnormal era. The floor leader claimed that the Moon administration failed to achieve anything in the past 5 years, not in terms of free democracy nor economic development, as housing prices surged out of control. He said ordinary people have lost hope and that concept of justice, equity and human rights are nowhere to be seen, leaving a society where only the corrupt and privileged few reap the benefits. Kim said that the solution is to put an end to the Moon government, stressing that the upcoming presidential election will be crucial.
And finally, the ruling Democratic Party is pushing for the passage of a bill that seeks to ban 갑질, or the abuse of exploiting of one's power against those in a weaker position, for top domestic online platform giants. Can you explain more?
Yes, the main ruling party is set to pursue these efforts after underlining the need for the bill during next month's parliamentary inspection of government offices. DP floor leader Yoon Ho-jung said in a speech before the parliament on Wednesday that the platform's commission rate of some 20% is a significant burden on consumers as well as small businesses that offer their goods and services through these giant online platform operators, such as Naver and Kakao. He then vowed efforts to level out the skewed balance of power between platforms and online sellers through what the ruling party has dubbed the bill on online platform fair transaction. The ruling camp is apparently seeking to duplicate its earlier success in pushing a bill through the National Assembly that prohibited Google and Apple from forcing software developers to use their own in-app payment systems.
Yes, this has led to Naver and Kakao stock prices to plummet over the last couple of days as well. We'll leave it there for our news briefing. Thank you for those updates.
Thank you.
We've now come to our Thursday in-depth segment, Korean Politics Digest. This week, we'll work our way through a number of stories and developments concerning the two main rival parties and their efforts to pick their presidential candidates. For the ruling Democratic Party, their primaries have begun, and Gyeonggi Province Governor Lee Jae-myung is leading the way. But his closest rival, former Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon, has now announced that it will step down as lawmaker to commit entirely to his presidential bid. As for the main opposition People Power Party, the lack of debates for the candidates is causing controversy, while a figure from the past, former party chair Hong Joon-pyo, has surged up the polls to become the party's second-choice candidate so far. To discuss these issues, we have joining us on the line now affiliate Professor Kim Byung-ju from the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Kim, hello.
Hello, good to be with you.
Yes, let's dive right in and start with the ruling Democratic Party. They held regional primary elections in the Daejeon South Chungcheong Province and the Sejong North Chungcheong Province regions on Saturday and Sunday, respectively. And Gyeonggi Province Governor Lee Jae-myung finished first by significant margins in both. What did you make of the results, Professor?
Well, Lee Jae-myung winning landslides, this is no surprise to anyone at all. And, the critics or skeptics could say this is a reflection of the overall, the field, the way things are going in the presidential race at this point, meaning then lack of excitement and, in a way, kind of possibly a reflection of apathy on the side of the public. We can recall the last time when Progressive Party produced another consecutive government. There was Roh Moo-hyun's case, and back in 2002, and there was the race done inside the Sacheonyeon Minjudang, the New Millennium Democratic Party at the time. And the Roh Moo-hyun's case was very, very interesting and exciting at the time. And he was catching up from behind number one, number two leaders in the race, and it excited people big time. And so his play of coming from behind really generated altogether big momentum for his eventual win in the presidential race. Now, what it means, what this whole game that we see, which is very different, Lee Jae-myung has been front runner, and he remains front runner. And recent results you just mentioned just confirms further that he will remain as a front runner. This may not be necessarily good for the Democratic Party. Just like you may agree with this view that, in any political campaign, excitement on the side of public really matters. And if everyone seems to see what they had expected all along, that's really difficult to become anything plus or positive in the eventual result. I'm not saying that Lee Jae-myung has a chance to be lost. We don't know yet, and he's a clear front runner in the polls. But this relative lack of excitement and possibly showing of apathy, it could be a cause of concern in the leadership, among the leadership of the Democratic Party, the way I see it.
Right. Lee Jae-myung earned over 50% of the votes in both races, ahead of the former Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon, who was over 20 points behind in both. Now, seemingly in reaction to this, and perhaps to build excitement, as you suggested, Lee Nak-yeon made a surprise declaration on Wednesday saying that he will step down as lawmaker to focus on the presidential race. He said he would defend the values of democracy and those of his party, and he said this at the Gwangju City Council, a very significant city in liberal politics, of course. However, as we noted previously with Yoon Hee-suk, it's not up to the lawmaker themselves stepping down, as it has to go through a vote at the National Assembly, and the DP are likely to refuse his resignation for now. So with that in mind, what are your thoughts on Lee's move?
Right. I think the future of his announcement really hinges upon those, and will probably be determined those predicted course. It's very difficult to pass that and everything. So I agree with your observation you mentioned here. And so a lot of people are puzzled here. Why did he bother to announce this? And the easy answer is just as it's indicated in his announcement, to strengthen his resolve to focus on the presidential election. And, he could have argued that lawmaker is an important public service obligation, and he wants to set that aside, and he wants to relieve himself from that duty and totally focus on the race as a presidential candidate. Makes sense. However, logically it makes sense, but in reality, I'm not exactly sure how much impact it could actually create. And we'll have to wait and see how this goes, but looks like the evaluation came out the way you have just mentioned. It looks like it's not going to pass on and stuff. We understand his desperation facing the Gwangju, event. Gwangju was the place where actually the old case I mentioned at the beginning of today's talk, Roh Moo-hyun's case. Roh Moo-hyun had a big upset in Gwangju, and that's where the whole thing turned around, and he caught up with Lee In-jae and Han Hak-up 20 years ago. So maybe, Lee Nak-yeon is mindful of that memory 2 decades ago, and he wants to stage some kind of really dramatic upset. But looks like the analysts seem to believe that that's going to be very hard to come by, and he's trying what he can. But looks like this announcement you mentioned is not something that actually is gaining a lot of support or understanding or excitement.
Very briefly, do you think there's any chance that Lee Nak-yeon can turn the tables and become the DP candidate?
Will be quite difficult. I guess today I rely on Roh Moo-hyun's case 2 decades ago, 2002 here. Roh Moo-hyun was at that time, his critics called him populist. He was sensational, he's flamboyant and everything. Lee Nak-yeon, he stands on the opposite side of the scale of his style, right? He's very soft-spoken and very cautious and conservative in his style. It's very difficult for him to excite people. So, catching up playing the catching up game must have made a lot of sense for Roh Moo-hyun, but for Lee Nak-yeon, his style, it will be very challenging to say the least.
Yes, it certainly looks like an uphill battle for now. Let's turn to the main opposition People Power Party now. While the DP candidates have had 7 rounds of public debates already, the PPP have had none. Instead, each of the dozen PPP presidential contenders on Tuesday made a 7-minute presentation on their key campaign platforms during a meeting organised by the party's Election Management Committee, and each candidate was limited to 1 minute for each question and answer. This inevitably drew criticism, with some presidential contenders even calling the event a school play without substance. So, Professor, why are the PPP candidates so seemingly reluctant to debate, and what was your take on it?
I guess, what my take on this is focusing on the task that Election Management Committee faces. The PPP had invited Chung Hong-won, former Prime Minister under Park Geun-hye, to be the head of this Election Management Committee. And their sheer challenge here is the fact that they have to manage 12 candidates. 12 candidates, that's a lot of people. And at this stage, offering the debate venue and stuff, it's very, very challenging. And so I guess after this, the presentation event, on Tuesday, and by the way, the Tuesday presentation of the campaign pledges was a second event following the August 25th vision presentation event. So people are getting a little bit bored with this unexciting format of discussion here, but they had to do it because they had to let all 12 candidates to speak at one time. But I think they are learning the lesson. For example, right, today, Professor Jin Jung-kwon, former Professor Jin Jung-kwon, is interviewing the candidates, and they're not doing this within a day, but they're breaking this event into 2 parts. First part today, and then second part tomorrow. So they're trying to come up with ways to manage these 12 candidates. I'm not trying to offer an excuse for the Election Management Committee.
Of course.
The sheer number is challenging, but then again, the style of having the setting itself, where they have to actually please all these different groups and factions within the party, gives them a lot of headache and handicap here, of course. But we'll see how, as the number gets smaller and the scope of race gets narrower, I think we'll get to see more of this. But many speculators are saying, well, this is all because of Yoon Suk-yeol, front runner, who is hesitant to get into debate. I'm sure there is certain factor behind that as well. Of course, Yoon Suk-yeol camp talking with Chung Hong-won, the head of Election Management Committee, pressuring them, maybe thinking that he's not ready yet. I'm sure there is that element there too, but the way I see it, the 12 candidates is the bigger problem. That's just my personal view here.
Right, there are question marks about how Yoon would perform in a debate setting. So that is something to watch out for. But I'm sure the public would want to see a debate soon as well to try and get behind and see the candidates for themselves as well.
Yeah. And one of the things that we should not forget is, I mean, this is the second such occasion, as we mentioned, August 25th, and then Tuesday they had these things. And they had some interesting points to be made to the public here, right? Yoon Suk-yeol, for example, offered as one of his three key policy directions, he said he's going to really focus on job creation, and he's going to focus on creating consensus within the society in terms of the social and economic policies, and he wants to reform the government altogether. And those are important ideas, and of course we will have to really closely follow what the details that will come up, and those are the things that actually the presidential candidates sell to the public in exchange for their votes. So we should not be excessively skeptical about what's coming out of this event. And Hong Joon-pyo's case, of course, his pledge to go through the constitutional revision. First time in a long time. Almost all presidential candidates and presidents have talked about it, but Hong Joon-pyo said he's going to undertake Constitutional Revision 2024, and he wants to work on introducing what seems to be the consensus choice, I guess, among the public in general. I guess in Korea, the most preferred choice for changing constitution is introduction of the renewable 4-year presidential term, where successful president can have another 4-year term, altogether 8 years in the office. So he promised that. And also he promised introduction of the removal of the current statute where lawmakers cannot be arrested while the National Assembly is in session, the immunity clause. He wants to get rid of that. And those are important ideas. So we should not be too skeptical or too, or taking all this lightly too much.
You mentioned Hong Joon-pyo there. That's an old name that's in the middle of a remarkable comeback. He is the former PPP chair, and he is someone who's lost to Moon Jae-in in the last presidential election as well. He recently polled third among presidential candidates. So if I run down the top four, DP candidate Lee Jae-myung came first with 27%. Leading PPP candidate and former Prosecutor General Yoon Suk-yeol came second with 24.2%. Hong Joon-pyo came third with 15.6%, and DP's Lee Na-kyun came fourth with 13.7%. Commissioned by Oma News, the poll was conducted by Real Meter on 2019 respondents aged 18 and older across the nation Monday and Tuesday. The survey had a confidence level of 95% with a margin of error of plus minus 2.2 percentage points. Now, what's remarkable about Hong's rise is that he was essentially abandoned by the party after losing the presidential election in 2017 and then leading the party into a massive loss in the 2018 local elections as well. He was considered a part of the old guard, and when the time for legislative elections came in 2020, his party did not allow him to run again as a lawmaker. So he ran as an independent in a district in Daegu and won anyway. He rejoined the PPP this June, and now he is the second highest polling presidential candidate for them. Professor, how do you explain his growing popularity, and how serious a contender do you see him?
Well, many political analysts often repeat the same mantra, the mantra saying that what's really important in the political campaign is not the specific numbers at one time, but rather the trends. And I think it's interesting trend that we see here that is this time in this campaign, that is the gradual decline of the outsiders. Korean politics has had quite a considerable tradition of getting excited about outsiders. I guess that's the case for elsewhere in U.S. politics elsewhere as well. But the thing is, ever since the time of Ahn Cheol-soo, was it 10 years ago or something like that? Since then, again, this time people are saying, well, people like Yoon Suk-yeol and Choi Jae-young, outsiders, there was initial excitement. But the thing is, as time goes by, the public seem to realize. And then I noticed this trend or awareness rising throughout the media in columns and everywhere, growing support for quote-unquote the real professionals in the field, meaning that rather than relying upon outsiders for new ideas, which I guess the public has realized there isn't that much of it, and now public seems to be coming back, or some to be reminded that actually the professionals who spend years in this game are the ones who has the most to offer to the public. So we've seen names like not only Hong Jun-pyo but Won Il-yong, Yoo Sung-min being named in many columns, both progressive and then conservative, new media outlets, saying that these are the professionals who really know the stuff, who spend years governing, working on the government of the system altogether. So Hong Jun-pyo seems to be the front runner in this trend, and because even though you mentioned you called him old guard, yes, indeed old guard, but then again he's slightly different from the typical image of old guard. He's relatively speaking, is much more flamboyant. He does things that goes beyond the expectations of the people, and he surprised the public. In that sense, he has capacity to create excitement among the public and voters. So in that sense, his trend, in my own view, seems to reflect the overall shift away from outsiders and then towards more of the insiders and quote-unquote the professionals of the game.
His rise certainly is surprising. Very briefly, to end with, Professor, we have to talk about this because the leading PPP candidate, Yoon Suk-yeol, has been batting away allegations that he incited the filing of criminal complaints against pro-Moon administration figures ahead of the 2020 general elections. Now, to be honest, this scandal has been the biggest political story of the week. But for now, there is little real concrete proof, and it would have taken up just too much time to discuss all the nuances of the story. So we won't go into more details than that for today. But I wanted to get your broad thoughts on this scandal and the allegations surrounding Yoon.
My own view at this particular moment is that we may actually get to see repetition of similar accusations and cases like before. So the way I see it, this is nothing new and something that we will get to see many times in the future. And so nothing to be taken too seriously, but we don't know the facts yet. We have every right to get to know more about what exactly this case is all about. And that confusion is coming from the fact that the initiator of this case, Kim Ung, the lawmaker, he's changing his words all the time. So he's confusing all of us. But the key point, we deserve to know all the facts. And when all the facts come out, there is a chance that this could be one of many cases that we will run into in terms of negative campaigns. There is such possibility. But that does not set aside the possibility that this could be an important case. We must know and learn the facts going forward.
Yes, perhaps we'll talk about it again at some point in the future. But for now, we'll leave it there. We've been speaking to Affiliate Professor Kim Byung-ju from the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Korea 24 Stock and Forex Update. The benchmark Korea Composite Stock Price Index fell 48.29 points, or 1.53% on Thursday, closing the day at 3,114.70. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also fell, losing 2.60 points, or 0.25%, to close at 1,034.62. On the foreign exchange, the local currency weakened 2.5 against the dollar, ending the day at 1,169.2 won. You can check Korean stock and forex closings at world.kbs.co.kr.
Next up, it's Korea Trending, our daily segment rounding up some of the other news stories that have been catching people's attention online in Korea today. And joining us on the line for that is Chung Ye-won to bring us those stories. Ye-won, hello.
Hello, Chang-woo.
So what are the topics that we're going to be talking about today, Ye-won?
First, we'll talk about what the International Olympic Committee has decided for North Korea in terms of their participation status for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Then we'll be talking about a customer's outburst that resulted in a street pastry shop owner becoming severely injured. Lastly, we'll discuss reformations passed by the National Assembly with regard to the so-called deserter pursuit position.
Okay, so we start with a surprising update concerning North Korea and the upcoming Winter Olympics. Can you tell us more?
The International Olympic Committee has suspended North Korea from participating in the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics next year due to their absence in the latest 2020 Tokyo Olympics. On Wednesday local time, IOC President Thomas Bach stated at a press conference that the board unanimously decided to suspend North Korea's qualifications, recognizing that their absence was a violation of the Olympic Charter. He also added that the North's National Olympic Committee was the only NOC to not participate in the 2020 Summer Games.
Right, to remind our listeners, can you tell us the reason behind the North's lack of presence at the Tokyo Olympics?
Of course. Last March, North Korea decided to not participate in the Tokyo Olympics to protect its athletes from COVID-19. In response, the IOC persuaded North Korea to participate by offering solutions such as providing COVID-19 vaccines to participating athletes. But North Korea did not accept it.
Right, they seemed adamant not to attend the Tokyo Games. Going back to the IOC's latest decision, though, not only are North Korea out of the upcoming Winter Olympics, but I understand that there is more to the suspension as well.
Yes. Bach said that the North Korean Olympic Committee would be cut off from any financial assistance during their suspension period. The North's NOC would also forfeit the money it should have received from previous Olympics. And the money, which could be worth millions of dollars, is on hold due to international sanctions.
So does this completely rule out any chance for North Korean athletes to attend the Winter Games?
Well, there still remains a possibility that North Korean athletes will be able to participate not as a national team, but as individuals. And regarding this issue, Bach noted that the IOC will make the right decision at the right time if the athletes do end up qualifying for the Games. He also said that the IOC reserves the right to reconsider the duration of North Korea's suspension.
Right, so maybe they'll compete under some version of the Olympic flag like Russia did. This is also quite surprising considering that North Korea has very close ties with China. They would likely have been much more receptive to sending athletes to Beijing than Tokyo. But as you noted at the end, perhaps the situation could still change. We'll see what happens. Let's move on to our second story now. What do you have for us?
Our next story is about an owner of a franchise hot dog store who suffered severe burns at the hands of a disgruntled customer. For those unfamiliar with hot dog, it is a popular street pastry typically served at food stalls and stands here in South Korea. It's a bit like a pancake that's filled with sugary syrup and served piping hot as it's usually cooked in hot oil. On Sunday, a man visited a franchise hot dog shop in Dongcheonlo Bukgu in Daegu and ordered 2 pastries for 1,500 won each. The man then asked the owner to cut the hot dog so he could share it with his party. The owner refused, pointing out the can't cut sign and explained that it was their principle not to cut the pastries. But when the man saw a pair of scissors on the store table, he asked once more. The man was rejected again as the owner explained that the scissors were not meant for food purposes. And at that moment, the man very forcibly threw his hot dog down into a fire filled with boiling oil. And the oil splashed onto the owner's upper body, who was standing in front of the fire.
Yes, that is extremely dangerous, as oil burns can be some of the most severe burns that someone can suffer, as temperatures can reach well above the boiling point of water. How bad were the injuries to the store owner?
Very severe, Chang-woo. The owner suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns on the back of her hand, right shoulder, and left side of her chest. She had to put a stop to her business for 4 days due to being hospitalized for her wounds. As soon as the victim gets discharged, the police plan to investigate the circumstances of the incident and find the alleged offender.
Yes, apparently the victim is continuing to receive treatment and may need skin grafts as well. So the man in question is still at large, and the response from the public has been quite vocal, I understand.
Yes, people have been calling this case the 3001 Kapgil incident. Kapgil refers to the abuse of power by someone in a superior position against people or entities in a weaker position. As the news of the incident spread, many netizens have called that the man be heavily punished and are relieved that there was a CCTV camera to catch him in the act.
Yes, the video was very damning and there really is no justification for his actions. Hopefully he will be found soon and made to answer for his actions. Right, what's our last story of the day now, Yeon?
We'll be talking about how the military plans to hand over the task of arresting soldiers going AWOL to officers instead of soldiers starting next year. On Wednesday, a military official noted that the Military Court Act was recently amended and passed by the National Assembly. This means that the current DP soldiers, DP standing for deserter pursuit, will now be excluded from investigatory work starting in the second half of next year. In the previous Military Court Act, soldiers were included in the Military Law Police Department, which assisted investigations under orders from military prosecutors or executive officers.
Okay, so what is the reason behind this revision?
One of the reasons is that the number of military service defections has been decreasing due to the use of mobile phones by soldiers since 2018. According to the military, the number of defection cases in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines decreased by more than half over the past 5 years between 2016 and last year. Earlier in 2018, military authorities had been promoting the ban on the appointment of military law and police officers as part of the Defense Reform 2.0 task.
Now, this comes as one of the most viewed shows on the streaming service Netflix by South Koreans currently is in fact called DP. It's a fictional series inspired by true events that follows two such soldiers pursuing those who went AWOL. The show presents quite a controversially damning assessment of how they go about doing that and the culture of bullying in the military, as well as the idea of mandatory military service itself. That raises the question, is the timing of these revisions and the massive popularity of the show a coincidence?
It is, according to Defense Ministry spokesperson Pu Seung-chan, who said that the abolition of the DP team is not related to the drama attracting attention and said that the ministry already decided in 2018 to remove the position. The ministry also emphasized that the situations portrayed in the show is far different from what the South Korean military looks like today. Defense Minister Cho Wook also said at a plenary meeting of the National Assembly Defense Committee on the same day that the series contains a few dramatized parts as it was said in 2014.
Right, the timing of this announcement might indeed just be coincidence, but it certainly did raise some eyebrows. Well, that's all we have for today's Korea Trending. Thank you for bringing us those stories, Yeowon, and we'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you, Tang. I'll see you next time.
We continue on now to Explore Korea, where we journey across the peninsula, discovering some of the cultural, historical and travel highlights that Korea has to offer. And joining me this week, we have a very old friend of the show back with us. He was a regular contributor for Korea 24 before my time as host, and he has kindly returned to join us for Explore Korea. It is our culture and arts contributor, An Jae-woo, and he's here with us now in the studio. Welcome back, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you too, Chang-woo.
Yes, I'm looking forward to working with you and hearing everything that you have to offer for us.
All right.
So let's get cracking. What do you have for us today?
Okay, well, today we're going to talk about a pair of fine art exhibitions. One show is an oil painting show. The other one is on photography. And what I like about these two shows is that, for me, as I appreciated the works of both shows, I kind of felt that they share a common ground of asking ourselves, what does it mean to try our best to stay connected, especially during these very difficult times of social distancing, and that's why I brought these two to the studio today.
Okay, so a pair of exhibitions. Which one are we going to go over first?
Okay, we're going to talk about the painting exhibition first. This one is titled Winter Summer. It's a two-person show of artists Yoo Hyun-kyung and Lee Jin-han. The venue is the gallery Art Space 3. The address is 효자로 7길 23, or in English, 효자로 7길 23. So it's in the Seocheon area. Mm-hmm. The Seocheon literally means West Village, right? And it means that really cool cultural/artistic village on the west side of Gyeongbokgung Palace. This show is currently running and it ends on the 25th, which is the last Saturday of this month. The doors open at 10:30 in the morning and close at 6 p.m. on every day of the week except Sundays and Mondays, because the gallery is closed on those 2 days of the week.
Okay, so a two-person show. Is there a set theme? The title, Winter Summer, sounds quite evocative.
Exactly. So Winter Summer is the title, right? And the more and more I think about this title, it's rather interesting because the verbal ambiguity of the pairing of the two contrasting seasons, right? If you think about that, and then I think there's also a non-verbal ambiguity, and that's, of course, because this is not literature. It's fine art. But let's talk about the verbal ambiguity first. If you follow contemporary art here in Korea, as a matter of fact, Yoo Hyun-kyung and Lee Jin-han, these are not non-familiar names. So they're actually pretty well established here in Korea. Yoo Hyun-kyung currently is based in Berlin. Lee Jin-han is based both here in Seoul and London. But if you think about their entire body of works, their respective entire bodies of work, and you think about these two seasons of winter and summer, I think easily you can make the connection of, maybe it means that winter is the body of work of Yoo Hyun-kyung and summer is that of Lee Jin-han. And this is because Yoo Hyun-kyung's, I wouldn't say all of her works are like that, but in general, they kind of have this wintry, like kind of really subtle and not too like flamboyant kind of a touch, whereas Lee Jin-han is the exact opposite. Very powerful, very peacock stretch-ish colors, if you will. So it has a relatively more of a summer vibe than the works of Yoo Hyun-kyung does. So maybe that kind of a contrasting juxtaposition was the intention of this show. So that's, I think, could be one way of understanding the verbal ambiguity, if you will. And then if you think about if there's a nonverbal ambiguity, it's that, first of all, these two are both considered abstractionist fine artists. And if you're not familiar with this, pretty much what we're trying to say here is that if you take a look at a work of abstract art, if you don't follow fine art in general or at a regular basis, you might ask yourself, okay, so why is this considered art in the first place, right?
Of course.
But the thing is, I think for these two artists, they're so talented and they've been perfecting their craft for so many years in such a sophisticated fashion that even if you have little knowledge on aesthetics and contemporary art and the likes of that, you still kind of get that emotional experience of, wow, okay, so this is perhaps what art is about, especially in the contemporary. But what's interesting about these two artists is that, again, Yoo Hyun-kyung, she's relatively more of a winter-esque artist, if you will. So it kind of feels like you're looking at a blurry, out-focused picture, but still you can identify what that picture is about, right? Like if you take a picture of, you take a selfie of yourself, but it's out-focused, you know that it's blurry, but you still know that it's you.
Sure.
On the other hand, Lee Jin-han, she's an abstractionist artist too, but it's the exact opposite. Everything is very focused, everything is very clear, but you have absolutely no idea what exactly this is about, right?
Okay.
Unless you have a look at the title of the work.
Sounds very interesting, this juxtaposition of these two works. I guess by putting them together, they, offer a challenge to the viewer, and that's perhaps part of the reason why they've been put together like this.
I guess so. And another thing is, what I really appreciate about these two works, now earlier I said, what does this have to do in the greater global context nowadays of social distancing and trying to stay connected, is that there's a kind of a discourse going on in a nonverbal fashion of what does it mean to be a member of your own family, but then at the same time be an individual. And it's really interesting because, especially here in Korea, because, in a traditionally Oriental society where we have these values of society and family, and we try to put those values in front of our personal ones. But again, we're in the contemporary, and we're becoming more and more westernized, and we're thinking more about individualism as well, and trying to find that perfect balance, if you will. And I think in that discourse, so the separation of generations and your relationship with your siblings and even your friends and coworkers at work and all these kind of various social relationships you're embedded in, and at the same time, what is the definition of my own identity in these social relations? I think it's a nice way to kind of contemplate on that kind of an issue, not so much in an academic fashion, but more in an artistic one.
Sounds like a very thought-provoking exhibition indeed. Once again, it's called Winter Summer, on view at Art Space 3 until the 25th of September. What about the other exhibition you wanted to talk about today?
Yes, that's the photography exhibition titled High Life, and it's the solo show of Choi Won-jun. Choi Won-jun is a photography and video artist. The venue of this one is called The Reference. That's the name of the gallery. The address is 자하문로 24길 44, or in English, 자하문로 24길 44. So this one too is in the Seocheon area. And as a matter of fact, these two venues are like only a 5-minute walking distance away from each other. So it's nice to visit both galleries in the same day, I guess. And another thing about having these two shows in the Seocheon area is that we're now in the month of September, right? So the hot summer season is gone. It's a perfect month to enjoy the many different festivities of the Seocheon area. So that's another recommendation right there. But coming back to this show, this one also is currently running, and it ends on the 26th. So that's the last Sunday of this month. The doors open at 11 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. on every day of the week, except on Mondays, because it is closed on Mondays.
Okay, so tell us more about this exhibition, High Life. That's an interesting title as well.
Yes, and High Life, as a matter of fact, I took a look at the curatorial statement of the show, and it says that the term means it's a musical genre of African music, and it first came out in the 1930s in Ghana. And originally, as you can tell from the title, the aristocracy of Ghana, it was their music. So it was traditional African tunes rearranged for Western instruments. And only the people in power, the people in the higher brackets of society were able to have full access and fully appreciate this kind of music. But then, of course, over the decades, it's become more and more of a trans-social stratification style of music, if you will. Another thing is Choi Won-jun, he focuses on the African diaspora here in Korea for this particular show. So he takes pictures of a variety of different African people who live and work in Korea. And the thing is, unless you're like a university professor or a celebrity from Africa, I think there's a kind of a general notion that when you see some African person out on the street, for example, and they're in relatively dirty clothes, you kind of think, oh, maybe he or she is a blue-collar worker, and they've come to Korea for this kind of work because they can still make much more money than back home. And in that sense, and as a matter of fact, for quite a few cases, that's actually true, although I would say that we should never, ever overgeneralize,
of course.
Right? Yes.
So is this exhibition then challenging those notions, those perceptions that we might have?
That's a good question. Not too much in a political fashion, but again, the title is High Life, right? And so it means, I think it has two different meanings. A, to make that economic success in a relatively wealthier country of South Korea, and B, not just in terms of income level, but also of just general life level, the intangibles, if you will, of life, and try to pursue that in a country where traditionally we don't have that much of an ethnic diversity. And how do you challenge that? And how do you make these connections through people from different origins and therefore collectively generate a high life? So what I really like about the photography of this exhibition is that it's not these documentary style pictures you take at the workplace or that kind of thing. It's actually the camera goes to the very homes, inside the homes of these people, and let the people dress in their favorite kinds of attire and take whatever poses they want. And they show you the different facets of the actual full life of these people. And I guess the bottom line is that when you see people from different origins, don't consider them as, okay, they're foreign workers or they do this or they do that. The number one thing that should pop up in everyone's mind, I guess, according to Choi Won-jun, is they are human beings, just like the observer, in other words, just like you. Why can't we all together enjoy a collective high life?
And this is where we go back to what you started with, this theme that you want to talk about, staying connected.
Absolutely.
So this exhibition, once again, is called High Life, and it's featuring the works of Choi Won-jun on view at the Reference Seoul until September 26th. Right, that is where we have to wrap it up for Explore Korea this week. Choi, it was wonderful to have you on the show today, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, great.
This is Scott Kelly, former NASA astronaut, and you're listening to Korea 24.
We finish up with Morning Edition Preview, our daily segment where we take a look at some features or reports coming out in tomorrow's English language newspapers. For that, we have in the studio with us now our staff editor, Mark Wilson-Chair. Mark, hello, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So, where are we headed to first today?
We're going to head to the national section of the Korea Times. Jang-ho, the Chuseok holiday is fast approaching, and Lee Hae-rin has a very relevant article on one of the holiday's major traditions, gift giving. If you've lived here long enough, you know what type of gifts I'm talking about. The sets. Spam sets. Olive oil sets. Cracker sets. What are other kind of sets? Pear sets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All sorts of even household toiletry sets.
That's right, absolutely. But it's actually about how consumers are seeking gift sets with less plastic packaging to cut back on waste. Kim Ji-sun told The Times how she feels that a lot of plastic packaging is larger and more extravagant than the gifts themselves. She said she's now looking for more plastic-free and eco-friendly options when trying to find such sets.
Yes, this has been a concern for a number of years now, how we need to cut down on unnecessary packaging. But that might sound like a good idea, but is that so easy to do?
Well, according to E's piece, yes. One major food manufacturer provides 90% of its Spam gift sets without the iconic yellow plastic caps. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
It also replaced polypropylene bags with paper ones, and in doing so, the food manufacturer, that one in particular, reduced the use of plastic by 467 tons compared to last year's holiday season. He also mentions other major food providers reducing plastic packaging by the tons as well. Now, eco-minded shoppers like him aren't alone, as according to a 2018 survey, and I think you were kind of touching on this, by the Green Consumer Network in Korea, 64% of 1,000 respondents said they were uncomfortable with excessive packaging. And according to a more recent survey this past May by the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry, 63% of 300 respondents said companies with ESG activities, ESG standing for environmental, social, and corporate governance, directly affect their consumer choices. Now, we know conglomerates will try to set consumer trends, but will also follow them, of course. And get this, according to that survey in May, over 88% said they'd be willing to pay more for products made by companies who practice good ESG principles.
Yes, that sounds actually very encouraging indeed. And these changes by the companies, they might be small for now, but at least they are changes and we are seeing this trend take hold.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, let's move on. What's our next story?
We head to the national section of the Korea Herald, this time as Shin Ji-hae writes about Representative Lee Sang-hun of the ruling Democratic Party criticizing South Korea's regulations on foreign performers, saying that they're too harsh or too vague, and that they may even violate freedom of expression. Representative Lee is talking about the Korea Media Rating Board's Foreigners Performance Recommendation System. The system is intended to help smoothly carry out the recommendation of foreigners who visit tourism establishments and also help foreigners obtain visas under the Immigration Control Act. But under the law, foreigners must be recommended and reviewed by the board if they want to perform in South Korea. That sounds pretty straightforward, right? However, Shin writes, if foreigners perform without going through the board, they could face a fine of up to 20 million won, that's over 17,000 US dollars, or could even face up to 2 years in prison.
Well, I see. You also said that as Representative E brought up issues with the vagueness or ambiguity from the rules as well.
That's right. Shin writes that according to data that E received from the board, reasons for not recommending the screening of certain performances include criteria like, quote, unstable tones and lack of breathing at the end. So Representative E is essentially asking, unstable tones and lack of breathing at the end, what does that even mean? The recommendation system is also carried out in connection with immigration, something E feels is inappropriate for the board to get involved with. Representative E says that recommendation tasks should either be transferred to immigration-related offices, not the board, or the ambiguous standards need to be removed to ease immigration regulations.
Right, it does indeed sound like a lot of red tape is involved, so perhaps a review of the system does need to be taken. We'll leave it there. Mark, thank you for those stories, and we'll talk again next time.
Talk to you then.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Korea 24. We'll be back same time tomorrow, so do join us again then to get your latest news, views, and updates from Korea. Till then, I've been your host, Kwon Jang-hwa, and thank you as always for listening. Goodbye.
KBS World Radio.